unaware his pregnant wife had just inherited her father's fortune. Husband and his family mocked her at the funeral. What happened when the will was read shocked them. He didn't just mock her, he humiliated his pregnant wife in front of everyone, right beside her father's casket, while his mother whispered that the baby wasn't worth the trouble, and the woman he'd been secretly sleeping with stood behind him, smiling, one hand resting on her own growing belly. 3 days after losing the only parent who ever protected her, 28-year-old Sarah Mitchell walked into her father's funeral 6 months pregnant, her grief still raw, her father's final warning still echoing, "The inheritance is yours alone, don't let them take it." She hadn't understood what he meant then, but she was about to. Her husband, David, stood with his family in a tight circle near the back, their laughter barely disguised. As they watched her struggle to stand through another wave of nausea, they looked at her swollen belly with the same cold eyes they'd used for 2 years' eyes that saw her as nothing more than a burden now that her father was gone. Eyes that believed she'd be left with nothing. Eyes that had already divided up a fortune they assumed would be theirs. "She looks pathetic," David's sister whispered loud enough. Pregnant and penniless, her father probably left everything to charity. His mother added, "That baby is the only reason David stays. Once it's born, he should be free to move on with someone more suitable." Sarah heard every word, but she said nothing. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, protecting the child who would never know the grandfather who had secretly built an empire just for them. And then came Elena, the woman David claimed was just his business partner. She stepped forward, her own belly barely showing beneath her designer dress, and slid her hand down David's arm, whispering a sentence that made Sarah's knees weaken. "After today, you promised you'd tell her about us and the baby. I'm tired of waiting." David didn't pull away. He didn't defend his pregnant wife. He didn't comfort the mother of his child. Instead, he marched toward Sarah, grabbed her wrist so tightly she gasped, and hissed under his breath, "Don't you dare embarrass me today by crying over a man who left you nothing." But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Sarah's father had already made a decision of his own. A decision sealed in documents her husband didn't even know existed. A decision that would expose their greed, their lies, their double betrayal in a single moment so shocking it would leave David, his mistress, and his entire family frozen in place, staring at the pregnant woman they'd mocked, who now held everything they'd plotted to steal. But here's what no one saw coming. Sarah's inheritance wasn't just her father's fortune. It was his final act of war against the family who saw his daughter as prey, and his grandchild as leverage. So why had Sarah's father changed his will 3 weeks before he died? What did he discover about David and his family that made him protect his pregnant daughter so fiercely? And what was in that second sealed envelope the lawyer said could only be opened? If David contested the will, the funeral hall smelled like lilies and hypocrisy. Sarah stood alone near the front, one hand resting on the polished oak casket where her father lay, the other cradling her belly as another sharp kick reminded her she wasn't truly alone. Her father's face in the framed photo beside the casket looked peaceful, proud, like he knew something no one else did. She touched the glass gently, whispering words only he would understand. "I miss you, Daddy. I don't know how to do this without you." Behind her, David's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "Can we speed this up? Some of us have actual lives to get back to." Sarah's shoulders tensed. She turned slowly, her black maternity dress straining across her belly, her face pale from exhaustion and morning sickness that hadn't let up in weeks. David stood with his arms crossed, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, his jaw tight with impatience. Beside him, his mother Diane looked like she'd just smelled something rotten. "Sarah, sweetheart," Diane said, her voice dripping with fake concern, "you really should sit down. You lookin' well. We wouldn't want anything to happen to the baby before it's even born." The emphasis on it felt deliberate, cruel. Sarah's hand tightened protectively over her stomach. David's sister Rachel laughed from behind a handkerchief she pretended to cry into. Maybe she's upset because Daddy didn't leave her his imaginary millions. More laughter rippled through David's family. Sarah's cheeks burned. She wanted to scream, to defend her father's memory, to tell them they were wrong about everything. But her throat closed up the way it always did when they attacked her. She'd learned over 2 years of marriage that fighting back only made things worse. Then Elena appeared, gliding through the small crowd like she owned the place. She wore a fitted black dress that showed off her figure and the barely visible curve of her belly. For months along, Sarah had learned from David's accidentally unlocked phone 2 weeks ago. For months, which meant Elena got pregnant right around the time Sarah announced her own pregnancy to David. The timing wasn't coincidental. Nothing about Elena was. She walked straight to David, her heels clicking against the marble floor, and placed her hand on his chest. "David, honey, the lawyer just called. He wants everyone at his office in an hour for the will reading." David's eyes lit up. Finally, something interesting. Sarah watched the exchange, her heart cracking further. Elena called him honey in public now, at her father's funeral, and David let her. Worse, he smiled. "Good," David said. "Let's get this over with. How much do you think the old man was actually worth?" Elena shrugged. "Does it matter? Whatever it is, it's ours now." Sarah's breath caught. "Ours, not Sarah's, ours." David finally looked at his pregnant wife, and something in his eyes made her blood run cold. It wasn't love. It wasn't even pity. It was calculation. Cold, heartless math. "Sarah," he said, his voice suddenly gentle in that fake way he used when other people were watching. "Why don't you ride with my mother? I'll meet you there. I need to take care of some business calls." Business calls. With Elena's hand still on his chest, with Elena's belly carrying his second child, Sarah wanted to say no, wanted to scream that she knew everything, that she'd seen the text messages, the hotel receipts, the ultrasound photo he'd saved in a hidden folder labeled Our Future. But her father's voice whispered through her memory, calm and steady like always when people show you who they are. "Don't argue. Just protect yourself." She nodded silently. Diane grabbed Sarah's elbow, her fingers digging into hard. "Come along, dear. You look like you might faint," as they walked toward the parking lot. Sarah heard Elena whisper to David, "Once we get the money, you need to end this. I'm not raising my baby in the shadow of hers." David's response was too quiet to hear, but his laughter wasn't. Sarah's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Not here, not in front of them. She climbed into Diane's car, the leather seat cold against her back. Diane started the engine and immediately launched into a speech. Sarah had heard 100 variations of, "You know, Sarah, I've been thinking, after the baby comes, you really should consider going back to work. David shouldn't have to carry the financial burden alone. Your father may have been comfortable, but he certainly wasn't wealthy. You'll need to contribute." Sarah stared out the window, watching the funeral home disappear behind them. Her father had been the founder and CEO of Mitchell Global Solutions, a tech consulting firm that had quietly grown into a $120 million empire. He'd lived simply, drove a 10-year-old car, wore the same watch for 20 years. He'd never flaunted his wealth because he'd seen what money did to people, how it revealed their true nature, how it made them dangerous. Sarah had worked as his executive assistant for 6 years before marrying David. She knew every account, every property, every investment. Her father had made her memorize it all, teaching her the business like she was his successor, not his secretary. "Why do I need to know this?" she'd asked once. "Because one day, it'll all be yours," he'd answered. "And I need to know you can protect it from people who'll pretend to love you just to take it." At the time, she'd thought he was being paranoid. Now she understood he'd been preparing her for war. The lawyer's office appeared ahead, a tall glass building that reflected the gray sky. Sarah's stomach churned, and not from morning sickness. Something was about to change. She could feel it in the air, in the way her father's final words kept echoing louder and louder. "The inheritance is yours alone, don't let them take it." Diane parked and turned to Sarah with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ready to see how little he left you?" The lawyer's office felt like a courtroom built for judgment. Sarah sat alone at one end of the long mahogany table, her hands folded over her belly, feeling her baby's nervous movements inside. David sat at the opposite end, Elena pressed against his side like they were already married. Diane positioned herself next to them, Rachel beside her, all three wearing expressions of barely contained greed. The lawyer, Thomas Brennan, 72 years old with kind eyes that had known Sarah since childhood, placed a thick leather folder on the table. He looked directly at Sarah first, and something in his gentle nod told her to breathe, to stay strong, that what came next was going to hurt before it healed. David leaned back in his chair, legs spread wide, completely relaxed. He glanced at his watch twice in the first minute, sighing loudly like this was wasting his valuable time. Elena played with her hair, examining her manicured nails, occasionally whispering something that made David smirk. Sarah watched them, and for the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel sad. She felt something sharper, something that tasted like her father's strength finally flowing through her veins. Thomas opened the folder slowly, deliberately. "Before we begin, I need to clarify something important. Richard Mitchell updated his will 3 weeks before his death. This is the legally binding final version, witnessed, notarized, and filed with the state." David sat up slightly. 3 weeks before death meant her father had been lucid, intentional, harder to contest. "The will states," Thomas continued, his voice steady and professional, "that Richard Mitchell's entire estate, valued at approximately $123 million, including Mitchell Global Solutions, all real estate holdings, investment portfolios, trust funds, and personal assets, is to be transferred in full to his daughter, Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, and to her children, born or unborn." The room went silent, completely, brutally silent. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. 123 million. Her father had grown the company even more than she'd known. David's face drained of color. His mouth opened but no sound came out. Elena's hand slipped off his arm, her eyes wide with shock. Diane clutched her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. Rachel actually gasped out loud. Thomas wasn't finished. Furthermore, Richard Mitchell explicitly excluded David James Harrison from any access, control, or claim to these assets. The will specifically states that David Harrison is to receive nothing, inherit nothing, and have zero legal standing to contest this distribution. David shot to his feet, the chair screeching against the floor. "That's insane. I'm her husband. We're married." "Community property laws." Thomas cut him off with a raised hand. "Massachusetts law does allow for separate property when explicitly designated before or during marriage. Richard Mitchell transferred 80% of his assets into Sarah's name 2 years ago, shortly after your wedding, with her signature but without your knowledge or consent, which was his legal right as the sole owner. The remaining 20% was transferred 6 months ago when Sarah became pregnant. Everything was already hers before he died. This will simply confirms his final wishes and adds protections." Sarah's breath caught. 2 years ago, her father had protected her from the very beginning. He'd seen what she'd been to and loved to see. Elena stood abruptly, her chair falling backward. "This is ridiculous. We've been planning our future. David promised me." She stopped, realizing what she'd just said. David's head snapped toward her, panic flashing across his face. Sarah's voice came out quiet but clear, cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Promised you what, Elena?" Elena's face went pale. Thomas reached for another document, this one in a sealed envelope. "There's more. Richard Mitchell instructed me to present this additional evidence if anyone, specifically David Harrison, attempted to claim ignorance or contest the inheritance." He opened the envelope and spread out a series of photographs across the table. Sarah's stomach dropped even though she'd known, even though she'd suspected. Seeing the proof laid out like evidence in a criminal trial made everything real in a way. That shattered something inside her. David and Elena kissing in a parking garage, time-stamped 14 months ago. David and Elena entering a hotel together, multiple dates, multiple locations. Bank statements showing David withdrawing thousands from their joint account. Money Sarah had earned working for her father. Money he'd spent on jewelry that never appeared on her finger. Text message printouts, dozens of them, planning their future. Calling Sarah the obstacle, discussing how to handle her after the baby was born. How to pressure her into signing over any inheritance. How Elena's baby deserved a real family life. And then the worst one. A recent ultrasound photo labeled Baby Harrison, dated for months ago, with Elena's name on it. David had gone to her appointments, held her hand, celebrated their child while treating Sarah's pregnancy like an inconvenience. Diane grabbed the photos, her face cycling through shock, anger, and something that looked almost like shame before hardening back into defensiveness. "This doesn't change anything," she said. "David is still her husband. He has rights." Thomas shook his head. "Actually, he doesn't." Richard Mitchell also left Sarah a fully prepared divorce filing, already notarized, requiring only her signature. Given the documented infidelity and financial deception, Massachusetts law would grant her an immediate fault-based divorce with full asset protection. He slid the papers toward Sarah. Her hands trembled as she picked them up. The baby kicked hard, as if encouraging her, as if saying, "We don't need him, Mama." Sarah looked up at David. His face had gone from shock to desperate, his eyes pleading in a way she'd never seen before. "Sarah, wait. Let's talk about this privately. Those pictures, they're not what they look like. I can explain everything." But Elena, realizing the money was gone and her meal ticket had just evaporated, made a choice that revealed exactly who she really was. She turned on David viciously. "Not what they look like. You told me you were leaving her. You said once her father died and we got the inheritance, we'd be together. You said my baby deserved better than being your secret." David's desperation turned to rage. He pointed at Elena. "Our baby? You trapped me. You said you were on birth control." The room erupted. Rachel started yelling at Elena. Diane started yelling at David. Elena screamed back at both of them. And through it all, Sarah sat perfectly still, one hand on her belly, the other holding the divorce papers, watching the family who'd mocked her at her father's funeral destroy each other over money they'd never actually had. Thomas leaned close to Sarah, his voice gentle. "Your father left you one more thing, a letter. He said to give it to you after they showed you who they really were." He handed her a cream envelope with her father's handwriting. "For my Sarah, my strong girl." She opened it with shaking fingers. Sarah's fingers traced her father's handwriting, the familiar loops and curves blurring through her tears. Around her, David's family still screamed at each other, their voices sharp and ugly, fighting over money that had never been theirs, revealing the greed her father had warned her about. But she didn't hear them anymore. She unfolded the letter slowly, and her father's voice filled her head as she read, calm and loving, exactly the way he'd spoken to her every day of her life. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm so sorry I had to leave you. But I need you to know something important. You are stronger than you believe, braver than you know, and you are holding in your arms right now the only family that truly matters, your child, my grandchild, the future I worked my whole life to protect. I saw what David was from the beginning. I hired investigators. I have recordings, photos, bank records, everything you'll ever need. Not because I wanted to control your life, but because I needed to give you the choice to save it when you were ready. The company is yours. The houses are yours. The accounts are yours. But more than that, the freedom is yours. You never have to beg anyone for safety again. You never have to stay small to make cruel people comfortable. You never have to choose between your dignity and your survival. I've made sure of that. There's one more thing, sweetheart. I've left instructions with Thomas. If David contests this will or tries to claim any parental rights to manipulate you, Thomas has a second folder, one that contains evidence of financial fraud, evidence that David has been stealing from our company for 18 months, funneling money to offshore accounts in preparation for leaving you. It's enough to put him in prison for 7 to 10 years. I didn't want to use it unless I had to, but I won't let him hurt you or my grandchild. You have all the power now, Sarah. Use it wisely. Use it kindly. But most importantly, use it to build a life where you never have to whisper your worth to people who should be shouting it. I love you forever. I'm so proud of the mother you're going to be. Protect our baby the way I protected you. With everything. Always, Dad. Sarah folded the letter carefully, pressing it against her chest as tears streamed down her face. She felt her father's presence so strongly in that moment, felt his hand on her shoulder the way he used to when she was scared, felt his strength pouring into her when she needed it most. She looked up. The room had gone quiet. Everyone was staring at her, waiting to see what she would do, waiting to see if she would break or bend or give them one more chance to take what they wanted. David stepped toward her, his voice soft now, manipulative, the tone he'd used when they first met, when she'd believed he loved her. "Sarah, please. I made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But we can fix this. We're married. We're having a baby together. Doesn't that mean something?" She stood slowly, her hand never leaving her belly. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but unshakable, carrying the weight of every insult she'd swallowed, every cruel word she'd ignored, every moment she'd made herself smaller to keep the peace. "You're right, David. We are having a baby together. But you're also having a baby with her." She pointed at Elena, who looked away. "You made a choice. Actually, you made 1,000 choices. Every lie, every hotel room, every time you pulled away when I reached for you at night, every time you rolled your eyes when I talked about our baby, every time you let your mother call me worthless, every dollar you stole from the account my father set up to keep me safe. Every single one was a choice, and none of them chose me." David's face crumbled. "I'll change, I swear. I'll end things with her. I'll do whatever you want." Sarah shook her head slowly, finally understanding what her father had been trying to teach her all along. "I don't want you to change for me, David. I don't want you at all." She picked up the divorce papers and signed them, her signature firm and clear. Thomas took them immediately, nodding with approval. "These will be filed today. Given the circumstances and evidence, I expect the divorce will be finalized within 60 days. Elena made a disgusted sound. "So that's it. You're just going to keep everything while he gets nothing? While our baby gets nothing?" Sarah turned to her, and for the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel intimidated by this woman who'd tried to steal her life. She felt pity. "Your baby has a father. Make him act like one. My baby has a grandfather who loved them enough to build an empire for their protection, and a mother who will never let anyone make them feel worthless. We'll be fine." Diane stood, shaking with rage. "You ungrateful little witch. After everything we did for you, taking you into our family, treating you like a daughter." Sarah's laugh came out sharp and bitter. "You treated me like a servant, like an obstacle, like something to use and throw away. But you were wrong about one thing. My father didn't leave me nothing. He left me everything, including the truth about all of you." She walked toward the door, each step feeling lighter, freer. Thomas followed her, carrying the folder with all her father's documents, all the evidence, all the protection she'd need for whatever came next. At the door, she paused and turned back one last time. David stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by his family and his mistress, all of them staring at him with anger and blame and disappointment. He looked destroyed, lost, like a man who'd just realized he'd gambled everything and lost. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I loved you. I really did." She placed her hand on her belly, feeling her baby move, feeling the flutter of tiny feet against her palm, and she smiled, not cruelly, but with the sad wisdom of someone who'd finally learned the difference between love and lies. "No, David, you loved what you thought I couldn't give you. You just never bothered to ask what I already had." She walked out, leaving them in that office with their greed and their schemes and their shattered plans. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Sarah stood on the sidewalk, breathing in the cool evening air, feeling the weight of 2 years lifting off her shoulders. Her phone buzzed. A text from Thomas. "Your father left one final surprise. Check your email. Password is your baby's due date." She opened her email with shaking hands. The message from her father, scheduled to send after the will reading, appeared. It contained a video file. She pressed play, and her father's face filled the screen, smiling at her with so much love it made her chest ache. "Hi, sweetheart. If you're watching this, you did it. You chose yourself and our grandbaby. I'm so proud of you. I've set up a trust fund for your child, separate from everything else. $50 million that will be theirs on their 18th birthday. But more than that, I've left you something I think you'll need. Video messages, one for every birthday, every milestone, every moment I won't be there to see. I recorded myself reading bedtime stories, giving advice, telling our family history. I won't miss their childhood, Sarah. I promised myself that. And I'm leaving you the company, but I'm also leaving you a board of directors I trust. People who will help you lead it or run it for you if you choose to just be a mother for a while. You have choices now, real ones. Use them. Build the life you deserve. And tell my grandchild that their grandpa loved them more than anything, even before they were born. I love you, my strong, beautiful girl, forever. The video ended. Sarah stood there on the sidewalk, 6 months pregnant, newly divorced, holding a fortune she'd never asked for and a future her father had built with his last breaths. She placed both hands on her belly and whispered to the baby growing inside her, "You hear that, little one? Your grandpa made sure we'd never have to beg anyone for anything ever again. We're going to be okay. Better than okay." The baby kicked hard, as if in agreement. Sarah smiled through her tears, turned toward her car, and drove toward the house her father had left her, the one David had never even known existed, the one where she could finally start building a life based on truth instead of lies, strength instead of fear, love instead of manipulation. Behind her, in that lawyer's office, David sat in silence, surrounded by people who blamed him for losing what they'd never earned. His phone buzzed with a message from his lawyer. "Based on the prenup and evidence, you'll be lucky to walk away with anything. Also, Sarah's legal team just filed fraud charges. We need to talk immediately." Elena had already left, calling someone else, moving on to her next target. Diane and Rachel argued about who had pushed David towards Sarah in the first place. And David, 35 years old, about to be a father twice over, with nothing to show for it but debt and consequences, finally understood what he'd lost. Not the money, the woman who would have loved him through anything if he'd just chosen her. But it was too late now. Sarah was done being chosen last. 6 months later, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby girl with her father's eyes and her grandmother's smile. She named her Grace Elizabeth Mitchell. No Harrison, just Mitchell. And when she held her daughter for the first time, she whispered the same words her father had whispered to her the day she was born. Words Thomas had told her about. Words her father had wanted her to know. "You are loved. You are protected. You are enough, exactly as you are. And I will spend my life making sure you never forget it." Grace opened her tiny eyes and seemed to look right into her mother's soul. And somewhere, Sarah felt her father smiling. Dear viewer, thank you for being here. If you connected with Sarah's story, if you've ever felt underestimated or betrayed, if you believe that real love protects and real strength is quiet until it needs to roar, then subscribe to this channel right now. Click that notification bell, because every week we share stories of people who refused to stay broken, who chose themselves when the world told them to stay small. Don't let Sarah stand alone. Stand with every person who's ever had to find their strength in the darkest moment. Subscribe now, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what moment hit you the hardest.